you have before you, and I think you can have these sheets now, are a number of points that I want to make tonight. And I think that by having that in front of you, it'll be easier for you to follow. And then I think we're going to go until about 8:30 or so, and maybe even before that, and leave it open for questions. And I want you to know that you really can ask anything. It's just not on this. You can ask me whatever it is. I'll try to answer it. And I think there are cards to write those questions out. So let's take the first point here. The earth is a shared source of life and sustenance, our basic needs. We are limited creatures. We are creatures who are mortal. And we need air to breathe, water to drink, food from the earth, all of that which sustains us. And so the earth really is, as the Pope calls it, our common home. It's a shared environment. It's a common good that's created to benefit all of humanity. And I think it's important to realize that's where the Pope's coming from. When he says this in the subtitle of this encyclical, the earth is our common home. Creation is our common home, in which we receive the basics of our life. It is the source of food and clothing, shelter, air, water, all that humanity needs in order just to survive. And there are people today who don't have adequate food or water. We see the drought going on in California these days. It's going to destroy the crops. People aren't going to be able to, it's not just a matter of not having enough water to wash your car or water your lawn. There are people who are going to suffer in many, many economic ways. The earth also does have enough of the assets to enrich each human being for the finite period of time that is our lifetime. And so there is sometimes a mythology out there that we have too many people, and so we have to cut back on the birth rate. Well, statistics show very clearly, and Jeffrey Sachs, who has written quite a bit about poverty, has shown this. The issue isn't overpopulation. It's the fact that a certain sliver of the population uses a disproportionate amount of the resources that we have. And so it is not a common home for us. It's an exploited environment that aggrandizes in a selfish way some groups of people. Food and clothing and shelter, air and water are basic assets to which each human life is entitled to share in order to survive. So people are entitled. They're entitled to good air, food, shelter in this earth that's given to us, because it is a common gift. It's not just our assets that we have simply because we own something, or maybe because we have power, or we have enough money to buy it. The earth is a common heritage to all of us, and everyone has a right to the goods of the earth just to survive. Just to survive. And the Pope feels very strongly about that because he knows he comes from an area in South America, but also a Jesuit, knowing the plight of people throughout the world who don't have adequate supplies of the earth's resources. The earth is also a shared source of context and meaning, the value and utility of actualized living. We all have a right to the beauty that is a part of God's creation. That's why it's wise for cities and states and countries to demarcate particular areas for parks, for forests, for national parks that we have, Yellowstone. The work, for instance, that Teddy Roosevelt did in taking some of the huge land masses that we have in the far west and saying, no, these are not going to be exploited by developers. These are part of a common heritage. So there is an instinct in every human being, and and people, leaders throughout the world, to create spaces where we can enjoy God's creation. Because beauty has an impact on our lives. Beauty humanizes us. If you remember that scene in Shawshank Redemption, in which the main character was in the warden's office, and he put a record on of an opera in which two women are singing, and there was everybody in the yard, the prison yard, stopped because they were just so enthralled by the beauty of that moment. Well, we need to have our spirits lifted by the beauty of creation. And so we have to realize that as our common home, it provides a context for meaning of who we are, in which we try to maximize, as it puts here, our own search for meaning in life. Meaning in our work and in our thinking, in the value of living in a human community, and in the experience of aesthetic beauty and vitality of many types as perceived through the five senses. As part of the introduction, I was bishop for 12 years in the Black Hills. I don't know if you've ever been to the Black Hills. It's where Mount Rushmore is. And it's some extraordinary sights that are out there, right? They're gearing up right now for the Sturgis Rally. If you've ever been out there with that, it's the biggest event. There are only 700,000 people in South Dakota, and on that week they get 700,000 people in western South Dakota for the rally. But everybody storms her. But part of it is not just coming together because they all like to ride motorcycles in the Black Hills, but because it is so stunningly beautiful in that area. It was a place where, of course, 4 presidents are honored. But maybe we all have our favorite places as well, where we go to a lake or a seashore, a mountaintop. We all know that experience of having those wonderful places. And so what the Pope is saying is that we need to appreciate the earth, not just for the resources that we get for existence, but for the context that it gives to us as we search for meaning in life. As we see ourselves within God's great creation and are humbled many times by the beauty and the awesomeness of all of God's creation. And the Pope is saying that's another reason why we need to protect the environment. Why we need to make sure that future generations also have that ability to search for meaning with the great beauty of nature that's around us. The Pope then gets into the whole business of our rights. Each human being has a right to actualize their life through acquiring and encountering the beauty and also the resources that are there. The Church's view is that we have a moral responsibility of each thinking human being to look out for each other and to assure this for our fellow human beings, that people do receive a fair, adequate portion of the earth's abundance in order to survive and thrive. So we have a moral obligation to protect the environment for not only the people who live in this generation, but in the next generations. That's the sliver that he is. This is not about science. The document is not about science. He's not defining anything with regard to. He's accepting some scientific results that he sees here. But this is a moral document. This is a matter of right and wrong, is what the Pope is saying. Just as any other teaching of the Church defines what's right and wrong, this one is also about right and wrong. We have a moral responsibility as thinking beings to treasure this earth. That people have a fair and adequate portion of the earth's abundance in order to survive and thrive. That each human being has the opportunity to find meaning, to derive utility from his or her labor and thought, participation in human community, and the experience of the beauty of creation in our planet. That really does, I think, impress upon us as we think about the oughts in life, the things that we should be concerned about, those obligations in life, that it is our obligation to protect the environment and advocate for the protection of the environment. That's what he's saying. It should be on the agenda of our own discipleship in following Jesus Christ. It's part of the understanding of what it means for us to witness to the gospel in the presence of Jesus Christ in the world today. So he's brought this up to a whole different level that we've never had before. Now, it's true, Paul VI and John the 23rd, Paul II, and Benedict the 16th have all written about the ecology. In fact, John Paul II probably wrote more about it than any of them, although he was Pope a longer period of time. But what we're seeing here with Pope Francis is that he is saying that when you think about your responsibilities as a Christian, this has to be a major aspect of what you're doing. It's not about just the... So often we reduce our Christian ethos and we haven't passed just the sixth commandment, or maybe even stealing, the seventh commandment. But we don't think too much about an obligation, a moral obligation with regard to the environment. And so the Pope is really putting this forward in a very new and in a fresh way. He notes in the encyclical too that we have very poor systems for stewardship in protecting the earth's abundance. People's rights are not being assured. It's the Church's view that the current world economic and political systems are concentrated in the hands of a small minority of human beings, both in social groups and in terms of countries. There are power holders who have take decisions over the creation that has an impact on all of us. You saw that, for instance, in the Soviet Union with the nuclear disaster in Ukraine years ago. Chernobyl, as you remember. Maybe you weren't about it there. Anyway, Chernobyl, here, a very poor nuclear reactor, one that was not carefully put together, imposed on the people, had an enormous impact on the future of that country. To the point, I was just in Ukraine, and people talk about it all the time, about the way that whole area has been just devastated and destroyed for a countless number of years. Nobody can go in the area because of the nuclear disaster that was there. And there are people still who are living with the fallout of that. There are people who were pregnant with children, and there are birth defects that you see now, 30 years later, however long ago it was. So what he is saying is that there are people who are in powerful positions in governments and also states that are powerful over others that are misusing the earth to their advantage. And so there's no real stewardship. We see this with the rainforest. People want to develop all of that by harvesting the lumber. And so we have this issue of whether or not, as we know, the rainforests are the lungs of the whole world in producing, in dealing with the carbon footprint of humanity. The whole business of how we take stewardship for the resources that we have, rather than giving it over to just those who are concentrating their power. This has led to, as he says here, degradation of the earth as a common good, an evaluation of the asset of the world that risk our ability to provide adequate sustenance and life meaning to all members for current and future generations. The important thing here is that each human being needs a minimum level of equality, even in current generations. So he calls for some sort of an international organization that's going to protect the world, protect the earth, that everybody should have a stake. He said this in Bolivia at one of his final talks, that the decisions of the world should not be made just by the people who have resources, influence, and power. But we all have to have a part in this, and there should be some sort of international guarantee for the way that the world takes care of creation and what we have. It's contributed also to the overuse of market models for making allocation decisions about common good and other basic life resources, without adequately correcting for biases inherent in unregulated markets, such as undervaluating the environmental assets and inhibiting market access for the poor and otherwise disadvantaged. Carolyn Wu, who is the head of CRS, Catholic Relief Services, was one of the presenters at the Vatican. And she talked about the importance of having a triple bottom line. And all you involved in accounting might appreciate this. She said, the bottom line can't just be a matter of profit and loss. But there has to be three bottom lines, three P's that she uses. Profit, people, and the planet. And her point was that just as a company today books deferred maintenance as a liability, a future liability, we also have to take a note of the fact that our use of resources, especially those resources that are not replenishable, that aren't recyclable, that are finite, has to also be factored into how people look at their businesses. Should people who leave a larger carbon footprint or degradation in society be responsible for the efforts to rectify that, to clean it up, to pay for it? We do that as well, when the Exxon Valdez spilled in off of Alaska. They had to pay a lot of restoration costs because of the damage that they did. We also saw that during the spill in the Gulf, where people's livelihoods on the southern shore were just wiped out because the fishing industry was decimated. But what the Pope is saying is, should we not also look at how businesses use the environment and the resources that we have in our common home, and be responsible not just for making a profit from their use of the environment, but also reinvesting back into its whatever they take from it, or either they damage. That there has to be this triple bottom line. And I think that he really is onto something here. Because if, in fact, we're just takers from the environment and don't reinvest in it, or just like people who harvest and who do forestry work, they always plant 2 trees for every one they take in the forest industry. It's kind of a general rule. If we don't have that kind of investment by business back into the system, and they're just taking, then we're all going to be a loss. Yes, they'll have the profit line that's pretty good, but everybody else will suffer. And so the Pope was talking about that in a particular aspect of unregulated markets that undervalues the environmental impact it has. That also makes it difficult for the poor and the disadvantaged. He said all of this too has contributed to the advancement and growth in the uses of technology without adequate reflection, including various mobile technology, social media, and wearables, uses that threaten to degrade the environment. We make a lot of toys. There's a new product that comes all the time. There's not a whole lot of recycling going on. There's a lot of garbage. We're making a especially with the new products and the new technology that's out there. And we really don't know kind of what to do with it. And so we have to, what is the need for us to take into consideration at that point? We don't want to also make sure that we don't become so technologically astute that we replace human beings in terms of jobs. Yes, there are some automated services that we have. We all like to have an ATM card and our ATM machine in order to withdraw cash and not have to wait for a bank teller the next morning to be able to make a withdrawal. But there are a lot of things that we can do that make sure that human beings are treated with respect to the marketplace. And finally, the point that I want to draw to your attention that he makes here is that we do have not only an obligation to protect the environment, but also to reform, to make some real decisions and changes. He's calling the whole global community to take a step back and say, where are we going? We need to consider how we might change the decisions that we make. Do we need to live a simpler life individually? Should we be more conscious individually of the waste that we create? The way that we take for granted the wonderful, abundant resources that we have here. The waste that's part of the waste of food, the waste of energy. The Pope is not against air conditioning, but he is against, as we're sitting here in this nice room, but he is saying, do we waste the energy so often that we have? We know ourselves, you see it all the time, that there are people who maybe have 2 or 3 homes and they keep the furnace on or the air conditioner on at the same level. Do we have a moral responsibility to, in a personal way, reform our lives and make a change? Do we have a moral responsibility in the way how much garbage we create and the decisions that we make, and also politically? Should in fact, in this in the elections that we have, should the environment be an important factor as people talk to candidates about policies that they're going to adopt if they're elected? We have a whole full breadth of issues, from war and peace to the rights of the unborn, to euthanasia, to discrimination, to whatever. We have a whole laundry list of issues. When's the last time we had a debate, a political debate, in which the environment was a major factor in that debate? I think the Pope is pushing us to make it an important political issue. I would be surprised when he comes and talks to the joint session of Congress at the end of September that he's going to raise that issue. I think that's going to happen. By the way, the joint session of Congress, whenever anybody talks to the joint session of Congress, it's usually at 11 o'clock. Well, the Pope's English he's just kind of getting it in place for him to give his talk. And he knows that he's better in the morning. He's an older man, he's better in the morning. And so he said, I really would like it earlier than 11 o'clock. So the congressmen and senators are going to have to get out of bed a little earlier because the talk's going to be at 9:30. So tickets are sold out already. So I think that this is where this is going. I think this is a real game changer here. He has brought this issue to the fore and asking us to really take responsibility personally, individually, but also in terms of how we our politics. We really do have to be intentional about reforming and reforming our economies as well. Should there be a tax policy, and he doesn't get into this, but it does lead one to believe, should there be a tax policy that encourages green energy use as opposed to using fossil fuels, which will be exhausted someday. Should there be incentives for people to build smart houses that are more energy efficient? Should there be public policy that gives people the advantage of investing in renewable resources of energy, such as the solar energy? When I was bishop in South Dakota, we redid this monastery, and we got a grant from the government to have the geothermal energy system. It was more costly, but it paid for itself in 5 years, and it uses only 30% of the energy that otherwise we would need. Should there be more aggressive ways in which we as a country, but as a world, invest in these renewable sources of energy? I think that's what the Pope is talking about here. The Earth's abundance is maintained and enriched, and not just destroyed. And we would have a focused policy that each human gains minimal access to the world's abundance for meeting our basic needs, and that also that each human being has some opportunity to live a life of purpose and meaning derived through labor, community, and aesthetics. The Pope is really big on that. If the earth is our common home, how does everybody have a place at the table? How do we create an environment and a community where people have access to the resources in life? This morning, I was at Cook County Jail, and it was my second time there. I went Christmas morning and had Mass for the inmates. There were about 8,000 people who were there. And a good number of the people who are there, particularly those in nonviolent crime, are emotionally ill because our mental health system in this country is broken. And we don't have places now for them to get care. And so they're on the street and they commit crimes. The sheriff talked about that. There was a story in the paper just this week about that. And sitting across from these were all men that I talked to who got into drugs and maybe petty crimes. There was a common denominator in all of them. First of all, they were arrested and could not make bail. This one man was there who had a DUI, and it was his third one, and he had bail of $7,500. He was poor. He could not get out of jail. He has a public defender. He had been there now for almost a year, waiting for trial. Then there are those who tell me of their childhood situation, their broken homes, in which they had to fend for themselves since they were very young. Well, my point here is that there are a lot of people in the world who don't have access to the quality of life that we should be able to take for granted in the world. Maybe that you grew up with in a home where the environment was maybe not all that perfect. No home is perfect. But at least there was adequate resources for you as a child to grow up, to get a good education and feel love, and also to realize that there were people who were pulling for you in life. But there are a lot of people who don't have that. And so it really does impress upon me that we need to, as a church, look for ways in which we're going to help those people who have not been helped in life, and to look for ways in which we're using the playing field. That is a good analogy, I think, with regard to the environment. What the Pope is saying is that the world is not an even playing field for a lot of folks today who don't have access to the resources, to beauty, because their lands are degraded by industry, who don't have an adequate ability to find a job because of great poverty that stretches across. And the environment is a way, we all call it our common home. We then begin to treat each other more like brothers and sisters. And that we have to take responsibility not only for the physical environment, but for each other. Because that's what this is all about. It's not just about protecting the earth as a resource, as our common home, but it's also about whether or not we're willing to create the world as a home for one another. And what that means in terms of helping each other along the way. So often in life there are people who think they have hit a home run in life when all along they were born on third base. And it's important, I think, for all of us who have been blessed to take a special responsibility for people who are underprivileged. But I think it's especially for people who are educated, who are better off than others, to take responsibility more so for the environment, to take more responsibility, to step up to the plate and say that this is an important public policy issue that you want to invest in. And that would be, I think, what the Pope is saying to our country in a special way. We have been blessed in many ways. And a lot of those blessings have come because we work hard. And we have a sense of our own self that Americans can do just about anything. And we have this wonderful spirit about us. But nonetheless, that too is a blessing. It's a gift. How do we use that and leverage it for the good of the world today? I hope that maybe that's the Pope's message to us as he comes in September. Thank you. I'm happy to